So let's talk about Shadow Dragon, and yeah, Shadow Dragon. Well, it's certainly a fairly unassuming affair. It's nothing too disneying, lighthearted, whatever you want to say. But either way, Martha, well, it's the start of everything, I guess you could say. But regardless, yeah, Martha just wants to save his homeland from the people who killed his parents. Or, yeah, generally speaking, and of course he obviously wants to lead his people, towards a kinder path and stuff, yada yada. But ultimately, Marth, he's known for, wanting to save everyone. Generally speaking, it's what you do generally, come to know as Marth. But regardless, he is the most, standard, Fire Emblem protagonist in terms of wanting to, get down to the bottom of business. And yeah, no froze Paul, but either way, Ramar still slaughters his way through, a lot of, different soldiers, obviously on opposing sides, so to speak, so it's, fine. But regardless, yeah, Martha, he has a lot of, things to account for and atone for in that regard. But regardless, yeah, but, most notably, though, one of the people he kills off is Camus, and, yeah, Camus, well, obviously you know him as the leader of the Sable Knights of Grust. He, well, as we see in BSFE, he basically saved Nina, from being basically executed by Medius and, Dolar and stuff and whatnot. And obviously, Nina, well, she was not exactly in the most kindly and, sightly of, positions right now. She definitely did not want to be around for, the Dolar Empire takeover. But regardless, and once Camus came over and showed off his kindness and understanding towards Nina's situation, even though obviously Dolar was obviously allied with Grust, and obviously the Sable Knights were supposed to be very loyal to Grust, but regardless, yeah, Nina eventually developed something of a spot in her heart for Camus, and this thing would eventually, fester over, and obviously Camus would help her escape to Aurelis. But ultimately the idea is basically that Camus, well, and Nina, that little bond ship, that little sprinkling hope of, odd and, unspoken feelings, as you would say, it ultimately would end up manifesting into something interesting. But regardless, of course, the goal of Shadow Dragon is to defeat the Shadow Dragon himself, Medius. And yeah, Medius, of course, he is a very old dragon, a very ancient dragon and whatnot. And yeah, he was obviously killed off by Henri and stuff. And well, either way, he had a little bit more oomph in the scoop, and it turns out he was able to be resurrected, his visage, his lineage, so to speak, by, of course, Garneth. And yeah, either way, yeah, obviously Medius, wanted to destroy all the humans and whatnot. He was an Earth Dragon, and yeah, there were other Earth Dragons who suffered, similar fates and whatnot. And yeah, obviously they could form an empire, fairly swimmingly, like humans generally. Regardless, yeah, that's it for now on Shadow Dragon, I guess. So let's move on to the second game, the Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia. It's well, obviously Almond Celica and their relative clashing idealisticness and whatnot. And in the continent of Valentia, it's obviously split apart. There are borders, walls, yada yada, and they, well, I mean, obviously the countries in some capacity do work together. Obviously, with say working with Rigel and some other mismaginations and whatnot. Saber, hating Rigel and drifting the seas, I guess. I don't know, but regardless, yeah, there is supposed to be a massive divide, but it feels a little bit more samey and dissonant. Well, not more, parallel and, carabit than, more split than I would say. But regardless, yeah, Fire Emblem Echoes, it's kind of interesting since it's the only game, without Anna and Gaiden as well. But either way, that's certainly interesting. Also, the fact that, there's no gold, so to speak. There's not traditional currency, so that's certainly something to, intrigue over. But regardless, yeah, obviously Gaiden was meant to be a side story, like a Gaiden chapter would be. And, well, yeah, in some ways it does feel a little bit disconnected from the main story, or the main, Fire Emblem timeline, so to speak, but it still has well, obviously it still has its schisms, its cults, its other things that it shares quite similarly to other games. But either way, it's certainly interesting, the dichotomy between, Echoes being, supposedly a side story. But regardless, either way, let's move on to Mysteries of the Emblem. And Mysteries of the Emblem, well, they are interesting for some reasons, I guess, but obviously Medius is back and he does his thing. He, gains enough power via the revived Garneth, and people are working to obviously throw the continent into chaos, pretty much. True that the Emblem, Garneth gets resurrected by his little cult, heretic followers, whatever you want to call it, and obviously he does his little things to Eremiah and stuff, and that causes its own little backlash, and apparently it's deeply scarred Katarina, and some very profuse ways, but regardless, obviously revived Medius, the dragon who just wouldn't go away, I guess, but regardless though, obviously, he would have captured some clerics as well, and, used them to serve Medius and his relative machinations, the particular interesting part, of course, is the theme of love that plays whenever you save the capture clerics in the final chapters, of course, and these odd diatonic strings you hear, during this little opening, type of odd sequence. The clerics are swacked out, as you can clearly see here, but there's some odd, siphonings and other means and whatnot. They are able to come back to, their fruitfulness, their fruition, so to speak, and obviously contribute, but ultimately, they appear to be, back in existence again, back in the realm of the living, as you would say, and, it's certainly an odd way to come back, but either way, As we can see in this game, there's, a sand clan, a flame clan, fire clan, and an ice clan, and they're just randomly attacking Marth. We have no idea who they are. They're just some a relatively, like-minded group of people that just start, robotically attacking Marth and everyone, and Marth and friends just do whatever they can as well to, I guess, defend themselves, but I don't know, it just, there's nothing exactly settling about any of this, but regardless, Marth, as for him and his journey in this game, he becomes a little bit more adorned, but, did he really gain anything from this journey? I don't know, but regardless, we're moving on to Genealogy of the Holy War. Genealogy of the Holy War, with Julius and, child hunts and stuff, and, other odd cultoid things, or things like that, and being able to squash all rebellions without much relative resistance. Of course, Seliph, the destined hero, so to speak, does take his cake, so to speak, and he does defeat the Loftus Cold and all the people that worship that general idea. But either way, obviously, it has its own sense of dread in a lot of different ways. But regardless, genealogy, it's famous for forbidden marriages, forbidden loves, lusts that shouldn't have happened, and either way, regardless, it stands the test of time as things that certainly did happen, but either way, regardless. So, Loftus and stuff, obviously Loftus, he treats humans and stuff, he degrades them far, far more than, any other, type of, being or, cult like the, Spectre and whatnot has ever treated humans in Fire Emblem. He degrades them far, far more than cattle could ever, hope to be degraded, but regardless, obviously though Sigurd, he has a certain part to play in this history, I guess, a little bit, but regardless, Sigurd, he makes a lot of decisions and whatnot, and he saves a lot of people, generally in the short term, he gets to a lot of villages, he, swooshes his hair back and says, he's glad to help everyone and whatnot, and, he is somewhat reasonable, of course, as you'd expect him to be, but either way, ultimately his rash actions and, invading countries and whatnot, and not carefully considering his, dilettantes and his, the careful political maneuverings and, relatively, distinct actions, it ultimately cost him, and, also, of course, his rashness at the Battle of Valhalla. Of course, it was eventually inevitable that it was going to catch up to him and lead to his demise, but either way, regardless, he did play something of a part in causing much strife for many people in Jugdrode, but either way, obviously Arvis, he would take the reins over Sigurd, feed off his life force, so to speak, but ultimately it didn't end up doing anything for him, and, in terms of overall, intrigue and overall morality, ultimately Arvis he was a complete shell, and there was nothing more really to say about him because he was completely defeated, obviously once his time was up. But regardless, there's a lot of different ways that genealogy has made its mark on history, but regardless, child sacrificing cults are now in vogue, I guess, during this time, so whatever. But now on to Thracia. So Thracia, well, it's got some stuff in it. It certainly has some stuff, but either way, I mostly want to focus on the prison arc, or I think it's called Manster or something. But regardless, prison in this game, Leaf is in fact imprisoned in a jail cell, and he has to escape, so to speak. And obviously, most of Leaf's life, it's pretty much felt like he's been in some sort of a purgatory or jail cell, always having to be on the run. His identity is a black ship for, hunters, bounty hunters, mercenaries, and, of course, the Empire, who is ever relenting against rebellions and stuff. But regardless, Leaf, he obviously knows he's not... Well, he doesn't feel incredibly special in any real capacity, and he acknowledges this multiple times, that there are other people who are so much more competent, and he's one of the weakest people he knows, he says, or something like that. But, of course, it's dragged along, a lot as a youngster by, Finn and Abel and whatnot, and, of course, later on, you get Duke Dryas and, August, and, they greatly influence a lot of Leaf's actions as well, and, obviously Leaf, if he didn't have all these people around and stuff, he probably would have, gone around to try to at least save all the people, because he's upstanding enough of a guy to do that, of course. But obviously, if it wasn't for his lineage, what could have possibly happened to Leaf? Would he have just been, another ordinary, type of average, Lopturian victim, or another just, countryside citizen that has to make his own way in his own place? But either way, there's certainly a lot of interesting contingencies regarding that. But regardless, he did bear his his father's bloodline and whatnot, and obviously we know about Manster and Thracia, their tensions and whatnot. Was Quan truly a competent king, and could Leaf truly, bridge that gap and whatnot? Of course, Leaf was well aware of the great tensions and whatnot, or at least he became aware of, the great schisms between the two nations overall, and he would, look to try to, obviously, resurrect that, once he became king of, the Thracian Peninsula. But regardless, going back to the prison arc, was Leaf's life ever truly, freed, as they would say? Was it just a consequence of the brand and all the other things that tend to come along with it? Either way, regardless, let's go on to the Binding Blade. The Binding Blade and Roy, some people would consider him their boy, but, either way, regardless, as for, Lead and stuff, well, it's a continent that, it has some things in it. It does, tend to kind of allude on itself, but either way. FA6, there are some characters that, carry on the torch, so to speak, from some of the FA7 characters, like obviously Cecilia with Pet and whatnot, and obviously Roy and Melina doing their part and whatnot, and some of the other little knights in training and whatnot. But regardless, the legacies of the characters in FA7 are somewhat important in some respect, but either way, the 8 legends, and obviously these 8 legends apparently created, use the pinnacle of human power and technology in their world or something like that to create, well, essentially, very powerful weapons that could, used to combat the very, very supposedly strong dragons and whatnot, and, fight over territory and whatnot, and, battle, yada yada, and they would end up creating the ending winter by, distorting physics, of course, or whatever, and obviously it completely, reinvented the dragon's way of living, and obviously, if the dragons couldn't, stay dragons, then what's the point? So they had to retreat far away, and obviously the humans would end up banishing them into another realm, and the ending winter would have some relatively lasting effects, and of course the weapons were scattered, but ultimately, there is some stuff that could be divulged, but either way, as for, this game, it does have a lot of, I'd say it has a lot of the most similarities to the current world, probably, with, the sullen exploitation of labor and whatnot, and, obviously on the Isles and whatnot, and, vast, watching each other, in each country and whatnot, and, all that type of spy and whatnot, and, obviously the, the shrewd and calculating, politicians, lords, whatever you want to call it, and the relatively reasonable, professions and jobs that people in certain countries take up, like Ilya and mercenaries and whatnot, and yada yada. But regardless, either way, as for the Blazing Blade, well, obviously the Blazing Blade is somewhat defined by the trio of Lynn, Ellie Wood, and Hector, and they all have their own little dynamics and whatnot, and they're fighting. Well, relatively speaking, obviously the FE7 crew isn't necessarily fighting a full-on country like pretty much every other Fire Emblem game. You are fighting basically an organization that seeks to, well, essentially serve one man and utilize his own wiles for his own potential power. But either way, as for Hector, well, you can see his mannerisms, here in Chapter 12 when he just, dutifully kills off this Laos soldier, just right there and now, and without, much of a smack talk or a fact talk. But regardless, Hector, he has a reputation for being a little bit, he moves around a lot and he's a little bit fictitious, but ultimately, he's known for being a little bit hard-headed, and he has a very, distinct sense of his own little justice, I guess. But either way, he still, views himself as a savior of good ideals, so to speak, and it's plain that he wants to try to, be a good role model to people, I guess, or something like that. But either way, his follower would end up coming back to bite him. His mannerisms certainly don't inspire the greatest of countenances, and they end up getting him killed in FE6. But regardless, as for Eliwood, well, Eliwood's known for, just going where the tide takes him. Obviously, he wants to defeat Nurgle once he figures out about him, and obviously he wants to defeat Laos and figure out about his father. And in terms of protagonists in Fire Emblem, he appears to be very unaware of generally what's going on in the world. But either way, regardless, obviously he has this moment where he kills an Indian and whatnot, and that's certainly something to divulge. But either way, Eliwood, there's not much more to say. And as for Lynn, well, Lynn, she has a lot of pride being from the plains, but either way, it's clear that she needs a lot of help from people who are not inside the plains, and she needs the help of all her friends to get a lot of things done. But either way, she very much likes and backs up, the pride of the plains and whatnot, and she'll always love it. And she'll always have her own way of fighting for her friends, and she at least, has a good enough attitude in terms of, generally fighting and, warring and whatnot. But regardless, let's move on to FE8. So the Sacred Stone's a game of intense dualities, and, these dualities are spearheaded by Leon. And Leon, in terms of a character, well, he is, I would say probably one of the most generally noble, as you say, characters that the series can generally find. He's noble in a lot of different ways. The fact that he's generally peaceful in demeanor, and obviously he chooses to pursue more bookworm type of things and general research and whatnot. And obviously the fact that he always wants to make up with his friends. He always wants to catch up with them and whatnot, and have fun in his own ways and whatnot. And obviously he also has plenty of power at his disposal, being the Prince of Grotto, and he chooses not to try to get complacent, and he wants to use all of his researches and technologies to help as many people as he can. And either way, he does go down some interesting avenues, of course, but ultimately they don't really take control of him, so to speak. But eventually he does discover some other avenues, so to speak, and the Dark Stone and some other similar secrets and whatnot, and yada yada. One day things are going a little bit differently than Erica and Ephraim had initially planned, but obviously Erica and Ephraim are mostly quite blissfully unaware of Leon's discoveries and other revelations and whatnot, and they go about doing their things, Erica being a little bit timid and not super into fighting, Ephraim always loving for a good challenge, and always wanting to be outside, being outdoors, wanting to be commutable, I guess. But either way, the Sacred Stones, it has spooks and stuff, and the spooks, they're all right. I mean, they are somewhat creepy. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, but either way, apparently they were, potent enough to create legendary weapons for us. So yeah, and there was some nameless gods or something like that gave Magville its weapons and whatnot. And obviously, like in other continents, all these people who receive these weapons would, divide that up into, and lead countries and whatnot. So yeah, Sacred Stones, it's got some similarities, but regardless, there's also some interesting dusty betrayals that come from the puppet, or the zombie Vigard, and obviously Selena and some of those generals as well. But either way, regardless, there's also Myrrh and her little arc with her adoptive father Morva. But either way, the Stones, they have to find a way to deal with the Demon King. So it's sort of interesting how, Magville and the Sacred Stones are kind of disconnected from the rest of the franchise, and, they don't really have any formal ties, to anywhere other game in the series. I mean, obviously, they are mentioned in Awakening. Prom knows about Magville and Erica and Ephraim and stuff, but either way, there's not any particular parallels that are, easy to draw upon. But regardless, with that, let's move on to Tellius. Yep. Smellius, Tellius, Wellius, the Gellius, so to speak. Tellius, it's certainly got a lot to delve and divulge and whatnot. But either way, obviously the main, relative thing that it likes to, toy around with is, Lagoos and humans and their relationships, so to speak, and the fine intricacies of, putting people into, of how people actually treat others that are not them, so to speak. But regardless, there's plenty you could divulge with this game. But either way, obviously in Path of Radiance you have Ike, and obviously his father, and how that shapes Ike as a person in this general journey and whatnot. And if his father wasn't killed, or something else, some other type of relative contingency happened, what would happen to Ike? But of course, despite the heavy tensions and whatnot between Bayok and Lagoos, Ike has a fairly easy time, just getting a little along with everyone, and making it seems of relative friendship and even a little bit of lust, go a long way. And obviously there are some a decent number of reasonable beings that are Lagoos, and sometimes vice versa, of course. But either way, it creates a lot of different societies and adversities within itself, and it creates its own different types of contingencies. But there's plenty of creepy annals of history, or of human history rather, that Ike goes down in Path of Radiance. So either way, that's that. But Radiant Dawn, well, obviously it extrapolates some things from the previous game, and it does some other things a little bit differently. But regardless, just for now, Ike, he's buff, and he's got a little bit more of a staying power and a staying power in terms of how Tellius goes, I guess. The Thralls, the effigies of war, they're quite strong here in Tellius and Radiant Dawn, and obviously, there are differing factions and whatnot, and they each have their own very, standard idealistic ideals that they want to uphold, and equally, they do hold some similar weights, with Micaiah, wanting to defend, her country people and her own relative sanctity, and the idea that freedom has to come through true fighting, blood, sweat, tears, yada yada, and Ike, trying to make sure, certain people aren't oppressed and whatnot, and his idea of making sure that we have some way out of a very dark and desolate future, even against the tallest of goddesses, so to speak. But either way, sure, she has a funny, human mass extinction event, that's pretty cool and whatnot, mass extinction, cool, people gone. But either way, regardless though, Ashura, she does have some semblance of relatively, niceties for living things and whatnot, and she does have something of a soft spot for humans. But either way, there's nothing to be done about that, and Ashura does go to fade into her somewhat relative obscurity, I guess. But regardless, yeah, let's move on to Awakening. Awakening is kind of spearheaded by Crom and his careful political maneuverings and his delicate actions he takes as a, supreme, figurehead, a political head, so to speak. But either way, Crom obviously finds Robin and whatnot, and yeah, they make a bit of a bondship. It is a true, friendly bondship. They do get along quite well, but either way, regardless, there's obviously Risen and whatnot, and they do cause a little bit of a burp, but either way. But yeah, the people of Elysia, yeah, they're kind of easy to fold. And yeah, well, either way, yeah, it's very, very easy to grieve for Graham and stuff once he's back around to take over the continent. And yeah, Lucina, well, she's very, very, apathetically, hated towards Grima, but regardless, yeah, they have to save their future, I guess. So there's a lot of things that they could be saving themselves from, but regardless, yeah, there are large, legacies at play here in Awakening with Naga, who, has quite the long storied, dissonance and, types of history, within the Emblemite and the, the Strones of the world and whatnot, and of course or rather their offspring, Tiki, and, yeah, they work to create their own, little agendas and their own, types of little worlds, in contrast to Feldragon. But either way, yeah, Naga, he does have a bit of a presence in a few ways, but regardless, yeah, either way, it looks like mostly the humans take a backseat in favor of some other, notable things, like, well, there's obviously the Tagwell and stuff, a race that was completely scorned and birched, by humans not too long ago, and the ever-lingering, crusades, taken on by Crom's father in the name of the Divine Dragon, so to speak, and, yeah, there are also some other weird little court and, other types of weird little things going on, but either way, there are also some legacies carried over from Valentia, and the Warrior's Tomb and that type of legacy, and in the more quote-unquote Oriental, types of indications taken on by Johnson and Sari and whatnot. But either way, and of course the Conquerors and the Mongolis, the Mongolian type of general nature of someone like Walhart. But either way, yeah, there's a lot of different, types of bodies, different types of things going on in Awakening, and they somehow coalesce and congregate into kind of a mess. But ultimately, they're used to stop the Feldragon and ever-impending doom for, all that the human race loves dearly. So either way. Yeah, there's plenty more I could go on about, with the Einherjar cards and, some of the other little schisms that, come with, these different types of political, figureheads and that type of reform and whatnot. But regardless, let's move on to Fates. Fates is famous for its kind of, tone-deaf story, as you would say, and, yeah, as for what it's got going on in terms of that type of stuff, well, yeah, it doesn't really have a ton to, latch onto or, a ton to, overall speculate in terms of, politicalizing or, roughhousing and whatnot. It's mostly just, point A to point B, yada yada. At least, generally that's how it's supposed to be, strewn and put together. But either way, there is obviously three clear, distinct choices, and with that come a myriad of worlds, of dreams, stuff like that. But either way, yeah, obviously we have, Hoshido, which is known for having a little bit of light and, cascading, resonating, it's got a lot of, Oriental, Oriental trees, as you would say, but either way, yeah, it's obviously got a lot of, Shindo mechanisms. It's, relatively traditional in that sense, but, yeah, as for Nor, it's got a lot of rocks, yeah. But, as for, this game and, its, legacy, so to speak, it's really all about the characters, and, yeah, I think that's very important to note with this game. Obviously, there are plenty of support conversations, but the way that the characters have to maneuver their way through this very surreal and dreamlike world, it's certainly something that it's not talked about enough, I guess. So obviously, in the Fates DLC, the Awakening DLC before Awakening, how Crom says, the Land of Fates is basically a mythical world and whatnot, and obviously Corrin is a little bit confused about that, and it certainly has quite a bit of relevance as to what exactly Fates actually is. But either way, regardless, Fates may or may not be real, or it may or may not be, just some hoax. But either way, it is all about the characters, and we can come back to Fates a bit later on that front. But regardless, we have some interesting things to move on to with Three Houses. So Three Houses, full of very hungry and adolescent students, trying to look for their stake in this fantastical and whimsical college world, as you would say. And obviously, obviously with Three Houses, the most important thing is the monastery, the education center, so to speak, and that little bubble around it. And obviously there are obviously a few different types of peoples coming to the monastery and whatnot, but ultimately, the idea of the education sphere, or the Delenview stronghold that you can see in a few different actual turning points of history. Well, it's all here in Three Houses, and it's something to mull over, I guess. But either way, obviously, idealism, as you would say, it's supposed to be very strong here, with Edelgard and Dimitri and Claude all having their own relative escapades they want to bring upon the world and whatnot. But either way, they all have their different ways of pushing in and out to make their dreams try to come to a reality. But ultimately, they all get in the way of each other in some interesting and unique ways. And ultimately, it looks like no matter which house leader you choose, or which outcome may end up trying to Delinvade, ultimately there's too many barriers in the way for their ideals and overall dreams to come true. And it's not hard to see just how much it makes people suffer, just because they believe that that they're a top dog, as you say, or how Edelgard tries to act like she that her suffering will completely circumvent the world from this endless darkness that is enveloping it. But regardless, of course, though, can you truly justify what Rhea does at all? Obviously, we know she wants to see her mother again, but obviously we also know that she basically she wipes out a lot of history, and she also makes a doctrine, so to speak, that people have to follow. Following outside of these doctrines will lead to some otherworldly hell, or some otherworldly emblematic chaos or whatnot. And obviously she does have some relatively interesting constrictions on how she wants to go about that little doctrine. But either way, Rhea, of course, she also she does basically put her relative troubles and whatnot onto Byleth and some of the other some of her other pupils and little creations that she tries to circumvent to get her mother back. And then, of course, there's her pure and other distinct hatred for anyone who sides with Nemesis and his relative, parallel ilk, so to speak. And, of course, then there's Sothis, and what does Sothis really want? We don't really know exactly what she's planning or, trying to circumvent for herself. But either way, besides the fact that, Rhea just straight up kills people. But either way, there's also the fact that she does, tend to overindulge or induce a little bit. But regardless, she just wants to feel the warmth of her mother again, and should that really be taken away from anyone? It is a confounding warmth to actually truly know, and it looks like she does somewhat know it, to the best of her extent at least. But regardless, Rhea, she does have plenty of contingencies regarding that, but regardless, yeah, there's a lot of broken legacies that have come, re-emerging here. But regardless, yeah, that's the end of me talking about these games. I guess for my little prelude, I guess. But regardless, let's I'll move on till next time.